John had been beaten in the head with a hammer and had his throat slit. It was pretty obvious from the beginning that the injuries were from a hammer because there were circular indentations in the skulls, which was consistent with a hammer.
What if I told you that one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Florida's history was linked at least at first to a rare blue moon? In 2015, a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Pensacola was rocked by the shocking murders of 3 family members inside their own home. What investigators found inside was unlike anything they had ever seen: bodies hidden beneath piles of blankets and clothing, and a crime scene so unusual that authorities initially thought it might be tied to a ritual killing. This chilling case not only horrified the local community, but also captured national attention. Today, we're breaking down the story of the Smith family murders in Escambia County. Details of the killings pointed to a calculated and extremely violent attack. All 3 victims suffered significant head wounds. Richard Smith, who worked in the cryptography department at the nearby Navy base and held high-level security clearances, had been shot and had his throat cut. John was found seated on a couch, his head crushed with a hammer and his throat slit, a manner of death suggesting that either he was asleep during the attack or knew the perpetrator well enough not to react defensively. Their mother, Vonsel, was found in her usual chair in the living room, where she spent much of her time watching TV. She too had been struck fatally in the head with a hammer and had her throat cut. Investigators took note that whoever committed the murders had taken the time to carefully cover the bodies, indicating a specific intention beyond simply killing. From the outset, the media and investigators speculated about the nature of the killings, largely because the timing coincided with the so-called blue moon, a rare event in the lunar calendar thought to have mystical significance in some cultural traditions, the sheriff stated publicly. Initial research has led us to believe that there's a potential that it was a ritualistic killing. The strange details of the scene, together with the date and manner of death, led many to believe the crimes had links to occult or witchcraft practices.
Research has led us to believe that there's a potential that it was a ritualistic killing. The method of the murder, blunt force trauma, slit throats, positions of bodies.
And the murders were quickly labeled the Blue Moon murders in the press. The Smith family were considered somewhat mysterious by neighbors. Vonsel was a recluse, reportedly never leaving the house and preferring to order large quantities of household items and clothing from television shopping channels, which left the home packed with unopened deliveries. Family and neighbors described her as private and seldom seen. Richard's job raised additional questions in the investigation, given his government work and security clearance. His unexplained absence from work triggered immediate concern among colleagues, adding urgency to the initial investigation. However, authorities later clarified that his employment did not appear to be connected to the murders. As the investigation unfolded, detectives narrowed their focus based on forensic evidence, including a key cigarette but found in the trash. They believed this evidence would directly link the perpetrator to the scene, supporting a case built beyond a reasonable doubt. Law enforcement's pursuit was relentless, reflecting their determination to hold those responsible to account for what many regarded as one of the county's most perplexing and grisly crimes. Escambia County, which sometimes refers to itself as the Redneck Riviera, has developed something of a reputation for unusual and high-profile criminal cases, from multiple spousal murders known as the Black Widow cases to the notorious Billings family slaying. Even infamous serial killer Ted Bundy was apprehended and prosecuted there. Jokingly referred to as a kind of Twilight Zone vortex by locals, the county's history of bizarre criminal activity only heightened public fascination with the so-called Blue Moon murders, cementing the case as one of Florida's most unforgettable true crime stories. The Smith family, residing in a quiet part of Pensacola, Florida, were known for their privacy and limited engagement with the surrounding community. Neighbors rarely interacted with them, contributing to the air of secrecy that later surrounded their murders. Richard Smith, the elder brother, worked at the Pensacola Naval Air Station in a secretive department related to Homeland Security, specifically within cryptography, a highly classified area dealing with the codes taught to Navy personnel. Because of his sensitive role and security clearance, Richard's unexplained absence from work drew immediate concern from his colleagues and supervisors, prompting a full-scale law enforcement and federal investigation. Authorities initially explored the possibility of national security involvement, including an analysis of unidentified DNA found in Richard's pocket and the fact that his car keys were missing, which was considered an odd detail. Resources from the Department of Homeland Security joined local investigators, but after reviewing Richard's projects and interviewing relevant personnel, they determined there was nothing connected to his work that would explain or provoke the murders. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to a neighbor who was openly involved in Wicca, a form of paganism that sometimes incorporates rituals influenced by lunar cycles. Police discovered that this individual kept ritual altars, a pentagram on the floor, dead flowers, daggers, and other items often associated with witchcraft practices. This, combined with the lack of forced entry into the Smith home and the timing of the murder coinciding with a rare blue moon, led detectives and local media to speculate about the possibility of a ritualistic motive. The positioning of the bodies and the efforts taken to conceal them under piles of blankets and clothing further fueled speculation that the killer was familiar with the victims and had a specific intent rather than acting randomly. The news of the murders devastated the Smiths' extended family, who learned from national broadcasts about the horrific details. Faye House, a cousin to Richard and John and niece to Vonsel Aunt Bonnie, expressed profound grief about the suffering her relatives must have endured, emphasizing John's childlike innocence and Richard's devoted role as caretaker.
I just broke down and started crying. You start wondering who did this? Who did this to them?
According to Haas, Vonsel became isolated only after losing her husband and struggling with illness, noting that in better years the family had been social and active, going on frequent trips together. As her health declined, it became Richard's responsibility to care for both his mother and his brother John, explaining why he, at 49, was still living at home. Amidst the turmoil, there was growing curiosity and concern about Donald Wayne Hartung, Vonsel's other son, who also lived in Pensacola. The family questioned why he had not reached out in the aftermath of the murders, but the answer lay in the ongoing police investigation. Donald was at the sheriff's office being interviewed by detectives. At the time, Hartung, employed as a hospital security guard, asserted he had a good relationship with his mother and stepbrothers, claiming to have last visited 3 days earlier for his usual Tuesday dinner with them. Detective Matt Infinger noted that the first meeting with Donald focused on building a picture of the Smith family's dynamics and general routines.
Donald Hartung seemed very odd to me. When I interviewed him, he showed no emotion whatsoever about his family being killed.
Did they tell you how your folks, your family on there was killed? Killed. They said they were deceased, and they never told me how they were killed. It looked like they were shot. Shot? Mm-hmm. How was that? Well, it looked like they were shot. It's hard to tell because there was a lot of clothes on top of them.
As the police pieced together the timeline and examined both forensic and circumstantial evidence, the search for a motive and perpetrator continued, marked by the combination of local rumors, national security concerns, and sensational theories about ritual and witchcraft. The investigation, and the sadness it brought to those who knew the family, added another dark chapter to Escambia County's already storied criminal history. Donald Wayne Harting arrived at the sheriff's office unaware of the full extent and nature of the tragedy that had befallen his family. When investigators informed him that his mother and two brothers had been found dead, Harting's reaction was surprisingly subdued. He expressed no visible shock or sorrow, answering in a nonchalant manner and denying any understanding of the specifics surrounding their deaths. When pressed about how they were killed, he suggested they appeared to have been shot, although he admitted it was difficult to tell due to the bodies being covered with numerous layers of clothing. Harting maintained the belief that the murders were not the result of a robbery, but rather the act of someone who knew the family, though he professed ignorance about any possible suspects or enemies. His calm and unemotional demeanor during the early stages of questioning drew suspicion from detectives, especially since he was the last person known to have been with the family before the murders. He was confronted directly about whether he had harmed his mother and brothers, to which Harting unequivocally denied involvement. He insisted he would never harm his family and repeatedly emphasized his innocence despite the intense pressure of interrogation. When asked to consent to a search of his home, located approximately 3 miles from the crime scene, Harting agreed cooperatively, opening the door for law enforcement to examine his personal life further. The search revealed that Harting was a practicing member of the Wiccan religion, a modern pagan faith that embraces beliefs in magic and witchcraft, often involving rituals tied to lunar phases and natural cycles. Inside his home, investigators found ritualistic items such as altars adorned with dead flowers, a dagger, and pentagram symbols commonly associated with both Wiccan practice and popular perceptions of occultism. This discovery enlivened media speculation and police theory that the murders could be linked to a ritualistic motive connected to Harting's beliefs. Harting's family members, however, presented a more complex and conflicted picture. His mother, Vonsel Smith, was known to be a devout Christian who vehemently disapproved of Harting's Wiccan religion, viewing it as devil worship. According to relatives, she attempted to shield her other sons from influence by Donald because she believed his practices were dangerous and morally corrupting, creating tension within the family. This perspective contrasted with Harting's portrayal to detectives, where he described a close-knit, supportive relationship with his mother and stepbrothers, stating that his mother was always there for him and that they shared a strong bond. Interviews with neighbors and other acquaintances painted a different reality. Those familiar with the Smith family described the relationships as distant and infrequent, with Donald's visits limited mainly to Tuesday evenings, when he would come over to cook dinner, a routine that raised questions about how much genuine connection existed between him and the rest of the household. This lack of communication suggested underlying family rifts or estrangement that were not immediately apparent during initial interviews. In the early hours following the discovery of the bodies around 1:30 a.m., Harting was brought back for further questioning. Detectives intensified their focus on him as the prime suspect, working tirelessly to piece together motives and opportunity. The peculiar timing of the murders, coinciding with a rare blue moon, fueled theories that the killings were part of a ritual sacrifice aligned with Wiccan lunar ceremonies. Detective Matt Infinger aggressively interrogated Harting late into the night, probing the connections between the blue moon's significance in Wiccan practice and the brutal deaths of his family. Despite the mounting pressure, Harting maintained that he was a solitary Wiccan practitioner who kept his beliefs private and that no one else was aware of his religion. He repeatedly denied any involvement in ritualistic killings or sacrifices, claiming ignorance about the specifics of such rites. "I don't know anything about Wiccan sacrifices," he asserted, distancing himself from the allegations. He acknowledged knowledge of the blue moon as a natural phenomenon, but denied that it had influenced any criminal activity. Throughout the critical first 24 hours of investigation, The theory that the murders were connected to a Wiccan ritual under a blue moon remains central to law enforcement's efforts to solve the case. Harting's declarations of innocence, coupled with conflicting testimonies from family and neighbors about his relationships and practices, complicated the investigation and added layers of intrigue to the already sensationalized story. As detectives combed through evidence, sought clearer motives, and navigated the enigmatic family dynamics, the Blue Moon killings became one of the most disturbing and mystifying chapters in Escambia County's crime history. Following the discovery of the Smith family murders, investigators noted peculiar and unsettling details at the crime scene, including the fact that the victims' bodies had been covered with blankets and clothing as if to keep them warm even after death. This behavior struck many as unusual and raised questions about the possible motives or rituals involved. When questioned about such practices, Donald Harting, the last known person to see the family alive and a primary suspect, vehemently denied any knowledge of ritualistic killings or symbolic acts. He dismissed the notion as the product of a crazy person, showing no understanding or acceptance of such behavior. Early in the investigation, law enforcement proposed a theory tying the brutal murders to a ritualistic sacrifice conducted under the rare blue moon, and intriguingly linked this to Harting's known practice of Wicca, a pagan religion that incorporates magic and rituals connected to lunar cycles. However, this theory was soon challenged by informed members of the Wiccan community. Susie Smith, a high priestess and respected leader within the Wiccan faith, publicly condemned the sheriff's statements that associated Wicca with the murders. She insisted that human sacrifice has absolutely no place in their religion, labeling the suggestion insanity and demanding a full retraction. Smith pointed out that the sheriff's claims appeared to be based on unverified and conspiracy-laden internet sources, lacking any factual basis. Furthermore, it emerged that the sheriff's announcement coincided suspiciously with a campaign fundraising event, which benefited from the media attention generated by the sensational theory. Though the theory captured headlines worldwide, it ultimately proved to be a distraction that did not advance the investigation in any meaningful way. Detective Matt Infinger, tasked with interrogating Harting, found his efforts frustrating as the suspect maintained a confident, unyielding innocence. Despite repeated accusations and even being called a killer during late-night questioning sessions, Harting steadfastly denied involvement. He repeatedly claimed love and respect for his mother and brothers, asserting that he would never harm them. He refuted any knowledge of Wiccan sacrifices or ritualistic murders, insisting that he was a private, solitary practitioner of his faith with no connection to such heinous acts. His demeanor, marked by a blend of calmness and confidence, suggested he believed himself capable of outsmarting the investigators. Without a confession, physical evidence directly implicating Harting, or surveillance video placing him at the scene during the murders, law enforcement had insufficient grounds for immediate arrest. Harting was allowed to return home, a decision that deeply troubled the family members who attended the funeral, where Harting's conspicuous lack of visible grief or emotion elicited fear and suspicion. One chilling episode occurred when relatives visited Harting at his house and witnessed him standing atop his refrigerator, rhetorically challenging authorities by slamming a machete on the table and questioning why the police had not found evidence against him. This unpredictable behavior heightened community unease. The investigation increasingly relied on forensic evidence to connect Harting to the crime. This proved challenging, as he routinely visited the family home every Tuesday to cook dinner, making his DNA presence in the household unsurprising or expected. Nevertheless, forensic analysis revealed Harting's DNA in locations where his presence was unexpected, such as on the zipper of his brother Richard's notebook case and on Richard's checkbook. These findings presented a contradiction to Harting's earlier statements, where he claimed to have had no contact with Richard's belongings and insisted he had not seen Richard in 2 to 3 weeks. When confronted in interrogation about this evidence, Harting initially denied ever handling these items or dismissed their significance.
Was he there when you were there Tuesday?
No, I never saw RT. Most of the time I leave before he gets home.
These forensic inconsistencies became a critical turning point in the investigation. The presence of Harting's DNA in unusual places undermined his denials and suggested a closer connection to the scene of the crime than he had admitted. Detective Infinger viewed this evidence as crucial, providing a tangible link between Harting and his murdered brother's personal effects. This discovery intensified scrutiny upon Harting and solidified his status as the prime suspect in a case that had become one of Escambia County's most notorious and complicated criminal investigations. The interplay of family tensions, religious beliefs, forensic revelations, and sensational media coverage created a deeply complex atmosphere surrounding the unresolved murders. With the Blue Moon theory receding as forensics and difficult truths emerged at the forefront, the investigation into the brutal murders of the Smith family reached a critical turning point with the discovery of vital forensic evidence in the trash can at their Pensacola home. Police found bloody towels mixed with other cleaning materials, but most importantly, atop these items was a cigarette but containing Donald Harting's DNA. This evidence was incredibly significant because it placed Harting at the crime scene during the time the murder and subsequent cleanup likely occurred. Detective Matt Infinger, who led the investigation, later reflected that this cigarette but sealed the deal for him, marking a key piece in establishing Harting's involvement in the gruesome killings. It confirmed that whoever smoked that cigarette and discarded it in the trash had been present at the time of the homicides and cleanup, thus implicating Harting directly. After months of meticulous work, law enforcement finally arrested 58-year-old Donald Harting Jr. just days before Halloween, charging him with the murders of his mother, Vonsel Smith, and his two half-brothers, Richard and John. According to police reports, Harting reportedly used a claw hammer to carry out the attacks, a detail that shocked the community and added to the horrific nature of the crime. The moment of the arrest brought an emotional release for many connected to the case, some breaking down in tears and expressing relief. A family member was quoted saying, "Thank you, Lord, thank you," acknowledging that enduring the previous 3 months without charges being filed had been agonizing. Yet, despite the arrest, the case was far from over. It would take another 4 years before it reached trial, during which time numerous twists and legal battles would play out. Harting's defense attorney, Michael Griffith, was a seasoned lawyer who meticulously examined the investigation for weaknesses. Griffith's approach was to challenge the prosecution's evidence aggressively but professionally, eschewing sensationalism or aggressive courtroom tactics. He stated plainly that while lawyers must be zealous, they need not be rude horses' asses, emphasizing respect and dignity in legal proceedings. Griffith was prepared to expose what he believed were serious flaws and gaps in the state's case that could raise reasonable doubts about Harting's guilt. When jury selection finally commenced for the highly publicized triple murder trial, the local and national media still fixated on the bizarre and sensational theories of occult ritual killings tied to witchcraft and a blue moon, dubbed the Blue Moon Murders, claims in their official court statements. Leading the prosecution team, Bridget Jensen explicitly rejected the Blue Moon and Wiccan ritual narrative, signaling to the jury that these hunting the witch theories had no place in the courtroom's deliberations. Jensen clarified that the state attorney's office did not believe the evidence supported any connection to Wiccan practices or ritual sacrifice. She warned against following such a rabbit hole emphasizing that their case would rely on facts and concrete evidence rather than superstition or speculation. Instead, the prosecutor focused the opening argument on providing a clear motive for Harting's alleged actions. Jensen highlighted a crucial piece of evidence, the last will and testament of Vonsel Smith, which explicitly excluded Donald Harting from any inheritance. The prosecution argued that this exclusion provided him motive to eliminate his family members to gain financially or out of resentment. The compelling narrative presented to the jury was that Harting was the individual who killed his mother and brothers, driven by greed and personal grievance. In stark contrast, defense attorney Michael Griffith prepared to dismantle the prosecution's assertions by emphasizing the absence of reliable physical evidence directly implicating Harting. Griffith stressed that no murder weapon was ever found at Harting's residence or any location connected to him. Furthermore, the experts uncovered no blood evidence tying him to the crime, beyond the DNA evidence found at the family home, which Griffith argued was expected given Harting's routine visit. The defense insisted that no conclusive link placed him at the scene during the murders or cleanup. Griffith also scrutinized the last will, suggesting that its exclusion of Donald Harting Jr. might have been an error in drafting or possibly referred to a different individual, challenging the prosecution's purported financial motive. While legal teams prepared their arguments, a new and dramatic development occurred during the 4 years Harting spent awaiting trial in Escambia County Jail. A jailhouse informant, Martin Devon Puri, who had shared a cell with Harting, came forward with critical eyewitness testimony. Puri claimed that during their time together, Harting confessed to committing the murders. According to Puri, Harting admitted to killing his mother and 2 brothers, confessing that his motive was financial, stemming from resentment over being excluded from his mother's will. More surprisingly, Puri alleged that Harting said he had been contemplating the killings for 3 to 4 years. He linked part of his motivation to supernatural influences, claiming that a Ouija board made him go overboard, implying that the occult or spiritual beliefs played a role in his actions.
Okay. And did he tell you who killed his mother and 2 brothers?
He said he killed them.
Did he tell you why?
He said he wanted the money because she left him out the will.
The jailhouse confession added a sensational, yet troubling dimension to an already complex case, intertwining dark family conflicts, alleged occult involvement, and deep-seated personal grievances. Despite this, the defense challenged the credibility of Puri's testimony, framing it as a self-serving claim from a prisoner possibly motivated by plea deals or other incentives. Thus, the trial was set to become an intense battle between competing narratives. The prosecution's assertion of premeditated murder driven by financial and personal motives, bolstered by forensic and testimonial evidence, and the defense's careful dismantling of those claims while questioning the reliability of witness accounts and the validity of the supposed motive. Throughout the years, the case captivated the local community and the nation, becoming one of the most notorious and haunting murder trials in Escambia County's history. The evidence, conflicting stories, and cultural overtones created a deeply challenging legal and emotional environment, making the pursuit of justice both complicated and fraught with uncertainty. During the investigation into the Smith family murders, authorities discovered a Ouija board along with numerous books and symbols tied to witchcraft inside the home of Donald Harting. These findings added a layer of complexity and public fascination to the ongoing case, as they seemed to corroborate suspicions about occult connections introduced earlier in the investigation. Scrutiny also focused on the quality and integrity of the crime scene investigation and forensic analysis. Defense attorneys emphasized numerous irregularities and questionable conduct that, they argued, weakened the prosecution's case. Key personnel connected to the investigation came under fire. Christine Rowlands, the lead crime scene technician responsible for DNA collection, had been fired and was facing prosecution for drug theft from the evidence room. Simultaneously, the state medical examiner involved in the case had resigned amid allegations of misusing state funds. These scandals introduced doubt about the reliability of forensic evidence and the professionalism of those handling it. Defense counsel questioned how jurors could place their faith in experts whose personal integrity had been so publicly compromised, insisting that these factors warranted skepticism toward all physical evidence presented by the prosecution. One of the most hotly contested issues at trial was the established time of death for the victims. Critical to the case, this timeline determined whether Harting could have been present when the murders occurred. The victims were found dead on Friday, July 31st, but police investigators concluded they were murdered 3 days earlier. On Tuesday, July 28, the same day, a neighbor saw Harting arriving at the Smith home and later leaving around the time Richard Smith returned. Surveillance footage of Richard leaving work that Tuesday wearing the same clothes he was found in supported the prosecution's timeline, suggesting the murders took place that night. Contradicting this timeline, the defense called Dr. Jonathan Arden, a forensic pathologist, to testify on the scientific data concerning rigor mortis and body temperature at the time of discovery. Dr. Arden explained that the physiological markers indicated the victims could not have died before the afternoon or evening of Wednesday, July 29th, at least a day later than the prosecution claimed.
Triple homicides are not common events, so that struck me initially. The circumstances in which the decedents were discovered at the house with the clothing on top of them and so on was of note to me. The nature of the injuries of each of them was something that was notable to me from early on in the process.
After a lengthy trial featuring complex forensic and testimonial evidence, both sides rested their cases and delivered closing arguments. Prosecutor Bridget Jensen confronted the challenge of securing a conviction despite largely circumstantial evidence. She reminded jurors that the theory surrounding ritualistic murders and the blue moon, popularized in media coverage, was excluded from court proceedings due to lack of evidentiary support. Instead, the prosecution constructed a narrative centered on motive, opportunity, and forensic links between Harting and his victims. Conversely, defense counsel Michael Griffith emphasized the absence of direct physical evidence such as the murder weapon, blood traces linking Harting to the crime scene, or eyewitness confirmation. He leveraged the questionable forensic handling and the credibility issues surrounding key witnesses, like Puri, to argue there was insufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Griffith underscored the scientific testimony regarding time of death, aiming to create a plausible alternative timeline that exonerated his client. He cautioned jurors against rushing to judgment based on speculation or suspicion and reminded them of the severe consequences of convicting without solid, unequivocal evidence. This trial exemplified the intrinsic difficulties when a case hinges predominantly on circumstantial evidence and conflicting testimonies. It was a collision of narratives between a prosecution asserting deliberate, motivated homicide bolstered by DNA evidence and jailhouse confession, and a defense committed to revealing investigative shortcomings and scientific ambiguities. Throughout the proceedings, the case stirred deep public interest, fueled by its intersections of family tragedy, alleged occult practices, and legal drama. It remains a landmark example of the complexities faced by the justice system when confronting grisly crimes shadowed by sensationalism and contested facts. The trial underscored the critical importance of meticulous forensic work, credible witness testimony, and clear timelines in establishing truth amid darkness and doubt. The prosecution in the murder trial faced a significant challenge. They lacked eyewitness testimony to place Donald Harting at the scene during the killings. The strongest piece of evidence they had was surveillance footage showing Richard Smith leaving work on Tuesday evening wearing the same clothes he was later found dead in on Friday, July 31st. This suggested to the prosecution that Richard had been murdered shortly after arriving home from work that night. While the Blue Moon ritual theory had been dismissed as a motive inside the courtroom, prosecutor Bridget Jensen addressed the jailhouse informant Martin Devon Puri's testimony, which included claims that Harting was influenced by occult practices and that a Ouija board had pushed him overboard, fueling fears among inmates that Harting was a witch. The prosecution's most compelling evidence centered on forensic findings, specifically the discovery of Harting's DNA on his brother's checkbook, belt, and critically, on cigarette butts found at the crime scene, including one in the trash amidst blooded cleanup materials. This cigarette butt was particularly important because it was located in the heart of the murder and cleanup zone, strongly indicating Harting's presence. Detectives emphasized that the cigarette butt should not have been there, and its presence was beyond a reasonable doubt evidence against Harting. Throughout the trial, Harting appeared largely indifferent to the mounting evidence. Family members reported that he maintained an unnerving calm, sometimes turning around to smile or smirk at them as if confident he would escape conviction. This demeanor unnerved jurors, especially the female members, who reportedly exchanged uneasy glances and reactionary looks at Harting during proceedings, describing him as creepy and feeling scared by his behavior. The defense counsel, led by Michael Griffith, challenged the prosecution's case vigorously. Griffith criticized the aggressive interrogation tactics used by Detective Matt Infinger, especially the repeated pressure on Harting to confess in the early morning hours following the family's murder. Griffith questioned why the prosecution introduced video footage referencing the now discredited Blue Moon and Wiccan murder theory, suggesting it was a deliberate attempt to inflame jurors' emotions and distract from the lack of concrete evidence. He urged the jury to disregard any prior mention of occult motives. The defense also took aim at the DNA evidence, arguing that the presence of Harting's DNA on items like his brother's checkbook could be explained by ordinary household movements. Since Harting regularly visited the family home, often cooking dinners every Tuesday, his DNA on common household items was unsurprising and did not necessarily implicate him in the murders. This argument aimed to introduce reasonable doubt about Harting's alleged culpability. After deliberating for approximately 4 hours, the jury returned with a verdict. Donald Harting was found guilty of first-degree murder on all counts. Family members expressed relief and emotional release, with some breaking down in tears after a protracted 4.5-year legal battle. Harting himself showed no outward emotion. The smile that earlier unnerved the courtroom was replaced by a palpable look of disappointment and stoicism. Following the conviction, the state moved forward to seek the death penalty. Yet the sentencing phase produced dramatic moments when Harting abruptly requested a mistrial and launched a lengthy tirade against his own legal team, accusing them of incompetence and disrespect. Harting claimed one of his attorneys had insulted him by calling him a stupid asshole, which he cited as grounds for firing his lawyers and deriding the quality of his defense. The presiding judge, however, rejected Harting's motion, requiring him to proceed with his appointed counsel. The jury then considered whether to impose the death penalty for each of the victims, Vonsel Bunny Smith, John Smith, and Richard Smith. Unexpectedly, while the jury found Harting guilty, they declined to impose the death sentence for any of the 3 counts, a significant victory for the defense. Prosecutors speculated that Harting's advanced age and poor health might have influenced jurors' reluctance to impose capital punishment, perhaps viewing execution as unnecessary for a man likely to spend his remaining days in prison. This outcome was considered by some as a reflection of lingering reasonable doubt about the extent of Harting's guilt, despite the guilty verdict. Family members in the courtroom noted Harting's subdued demeanor following the trial, recognizing that he was far from triumphant. One relative remarked that Harting deserved to suffer for his crimes, though she also described having gone through a personal journey toward forgiveness, acknowledging the pain, but resolving not to forget the evil of what was done. The case left a lasting impression, underscoring a dark and tragic chapter marked by brutal violence, complex family dynamics, and a legal battle defined by forensic intricacies and emotional turmoil. The family's experience served as a stark reminder of how if you put something out bad, expect bad. That's how it works, underscoring the inescapable consequences of evil deeds. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the evidence and the verdict in this case? And as always, stay curious and stay safe. See you in the next video.